Yeah, tell us about it. I'm super curious.
Basically, I was one grade short of, the cutoff point because I was being judged on my ability to study architecture based on how I performed in science. So I feel like the society would have missed out on a good architect simply because of one grade.
Everything is created twice, first in the mind, then in reality. So, as an architect, how do you interpret this in your work?
It's about taking what already exists and then putting it together in new ways to solve a problem. We've gone past interchanges in the heart of a city. We have district engineers. We don't have district architects. And we all know that engineers build structures. You hear urban planning or settlement planning. You hear architecture, and all of that. But you don't really hear enough about urban design. It's not about whether something is possible or not. Nothing is impossible when it comes to design. It's just being intentional that matters. Listen to that woman. She had a permit.
What's your take on people hiring designers from platforms such as and individuals who are not formally trained as architects?
I really don't have a problem how people decide to procure their building projects.
Welcome to Tuition Jrnl. Super excited to have you here with me today. I've followed your work for quite a bit, and there's one thing I really love about it. It's the philosophy behind it, and even how you speak about architecture in general. Like, it's something that I find truly inspiring. So here's how I want to start our conversation today. For someone who has not seen Hassan on social media or has no idea who you are, how would you describe yourself to them?
Fundamentally, I am a creative. So growing up, I've always been inclined to making things, drawing things. I've always been inclined to the process of how things are put together. And so that led me to study architecture. So as a profession, that's what I do.
So take me back to when it all started. What exactly got you into architecture? Is it like a moment in your childhood, or what exactly got you into it?
Well, like I said, growing up, I always had these tendencies to draw, to build stuff. I grew up in a neighborhood where there was always a lot of construction in a mission house in Osu. So I was always exposed to that process and just all of the wood and the nails and the stuff that I got with construction. They turned into my playground, if you like. I would find me taking pieces of wood and trying to put something together, trying to make a table, all that kind of stuff. So I always had those tendencies. And so when I was going to secondary school, typically in Ghana, you go through some career guidance and counseling and all of that. I was always curious about what I wanted to do. So the questions I asked led me to the decision to study science in secondary school and TI Ahmadiyya Secondary School in Kumasi. And I applied to KNUST, where at the time was the only school of architecture in Ghana. I got admission. I mean, that's an interesting story in its own.
Yeah, tell us about it. I'm super curious.
Basically, I was one grade short of, the cutoff point. And, typically what you would do is you would register, or if you like, you would apply to different universities. Yeah. So I got admission to University of Ghana, Lagos, to study physical sciences. And trust me, I was going to do it anyway if I didn't have any other choice. But thankfully, there was an opening to get some kind of protocol admission. And I took advantage of that.
I really like the fact that you're super honest about this part of your journey. Not so many people are comfortable to admit that part.
Sometimes what you really want to do, what people don't think you're good enough. Meanwhile, at the end of the day, what really should matter, if you ask me, is the real intent of the person. Because I was being judged on my ability to study architecture based on how I performed in science. Right. General. And that would have excluded me from architecture. Meanwhile, when I did architecture, at the end of the day, I ended up becoming in what I think of as a good architect. So I feel like the society would have missed out on a good architect simply because of one grade. Yeah. When indeed that was just biology and things that are not as important when it comes to designing as you think.
So based on this experience, do you think the process of admitting students at the School of Architecture needs to change? Because I'm asking this because I had a similar experience, and then I went on to realize that in other places, if you're unable to get into the first tier of school, you can't even get into the second tier, even the third tier, whereas down here, if you just can't get into the only school that has the program that you want to study, it means you're going to be screwed for the rest of your life.
I understand why they have cutoff points, because there's not very much they can do to determine who's qualified or not, right? And it's because of our education system, the kind of system that we've been running. So our secondary school education system does not sort of have a way of looking at the talents of individuals and trying to pair them to what they think they should be doing. And it's all exams based and a lot of these exams. And we all went secondary school in Ghana. You know how it goes. Sometimes someone is passing just because they go up, or someone is
Right.
someone who could have done better. It just happens to be that on that day they weren't feeling very well. Like there's so many factors. So the whole system of examinations of just tick boxes and then churn out what has been taught as a way of determining what you should become is what I think we need to look at fundamentally. And especially in architecture school, where, as far as I'm concerned, from my experience, I realized that there's a lot of, it's passion based as well. So it's not really just about how much you already know, but it's also how much you want to learn or how interested you are in what it is you want to get into. So the process might exclude people who, if they had the opportunity to get into architecture school, would have really discovered themselves. The processes that we have could easily exclude people from that opportunity. And on the other hand, you have people who just simply because they were academically good who end up in architecture when they really don't have the passion for it and they don't even have the right temperaments for architecture. So I think more of an interview process, if you like, there should be more weight put on some kind of an interview process to be in architecture school than just the exam score.
So let's talk about you. There's this quote that I find super interesting, and it goes like this. It's actually from the book A Monk Who Sold His Ferrari by Robin Sherman, and it's like this. Everything is created twice, first in the mind, then in reality. So as an architect, how do you interpret this in your work? And what does design mean to you in that first stage of creating something before it's actually built?
Design basically has got to do, and if you like, a very important aspect of design is creativity. So first of all, creativity is about taking what already exists and then putting it together in new ways to solve a problem. And in the process of design, there's a lot that goes on in the mind. In the mind, you have to go through a process of, thinking, a process of brainstorming and all of that. And so for me, being someone who originally was a creative, as what I define myself as before I even got into architecture school, it has always been very important that I go back to the basics, going back to basics and looking at what it is I'm trying to achieve and then conceive it in the mind. It's really what drew me to architecture school to begin with, to be able to conceive something out of nothing. And when I say out of nothing, the nothing could be a problem. It could be a brief. It could be a challenge that's thrown. It could also be just something you have observed that no one has observed. And so it's not only necessarily boxed into architecture. It's a whole lot of things. It's everything from furniture to products to public space to buildings to cities. It transcends all of these things to be able to first conceive. Because if you look at how societies have been developed over the years and across the world, you realize that architects have been at the forefront. Unfortunately, we are in a society where a lot of emphasis has not been put on the art of placemaking. But if you think about it, all of the countries, all of the cities that we all love to go to, we all always reference. The first thing you think about when you think of that city is some form of built, environment. It's either the public parks, it's either the skyline, it's either, the iconic buildings that sort of let you know that this is this city or that city. And it was all conceived in the minds of someone. So it's very fundamental to be able to process things in your mind and build the tools or understand the necessary tools to be able to translate that idea into a form that others can understand, you can bring people along with, and then also solve their problems and, on a daily basis.
I really like the point you just made about the cities that we'll typically travel to. So, in your view, what do you think causes the disconnection between what actually gets built and what's actually on the plans at the municipal assemblies?
I recently went to see some lands in the Eastern region where, there's this company that's selling some lands, riverfront lands. I went to have a look at them. And this is a very interesting, it's a bay along the Volta River with a very wide expanse. And this guy shows me the master plan from the assembly of that place. And it's a great pattern, right? Meanwhile, I'm standing on the land and I know for sure that if you want to do anything here, it has to be some kind of a radial pattern along the contours of the land because it's very steep at certain ends and all of that. But that's one of the issues, is that the way we've looked at our city has been very much from the settlement planning perspective. And not to say that it's not important. That's very important. But a lot is not taken into consideration. So our cities and rural environments and, all of our planning is done from a very macro level. And very little is done to understand, for example, the topography of the space and how we need to build along the topography in general. So that's just from the planning perspective. But coming back to your point about cities, is because a lot of the plans, the schemes are just done without the needed level of design. It's just, someone would say, a T-square and set square sort of planning, where you're just drawing lines and subdividing without understanding the full context of all of those individual plots. And the second thing also is that a lot of the development is dictated by private individuals who just do what it is they want to do. And then now the city tries to make sense out of it. Ideally, the city should be planning the zones and not just planning the zones in terms of putting on paper, but then also putting in their necessary infrastructure, the roads, the electricity, the water, and then allowing developers to be able to now go in and develop. But now what happens is that developers go in and develop, and then the city now goes in and tries to, sometimes the development gets ahead of even the local zoning and planning.
Using Tema as a case study, what vision do you think we can draw from its development when it comes to shaping future cities in this country?
I think Tema was very deliberate at the time. The Outsiders was a brick firm commissioned to come up with that plan of Tema, and they did so many things right. Very clearly demarcated zones, residential, industrial, commercial, all of that. And then you had areas where there was mix of uses and all of that, the proper setbacks, all of that kind of stuff. There's a lot we can learn from Tema. Unfortunately, rather than learning from Tema is rather learning from Accra. Even Accra itself had the plans from time to time. Main Accra metropolitan area, especially as we know, it's the AMA. Yeah. Most of it was planned, by Fry and Jew, just pre-independence. And then after independence, there was a continuation of that. But the other problem is that we haven't followed through with the plans. So if you go to the areas that were planned, like a rich enclave, the ministries area, you can see remnants of the plan. You still see a central sewage system in some of the areas that are still working. I don't know if, they were still working some years ago. I don't know if they're still working today. You can see very clear demarcations and all of that. But again, even those plans were based on, urban design principles of that day, of back in the day, where they were still looking at the garden city concept, Accra Tema being a satellite of Accra, and then having a green zone and all of that. And there are so many concepts of urban design that have evolved over the years, and it's best practice, but we still haven't even gotten the fundamentals right. So we haven't been able to move into the best practice like new urbanism and walkable cities and urban acupuncture, like all of these different urban design principle. We haven't even gotten the old ones right, let alone taking up a new one. So
I feel we keep paying the price by pushing in the wrong direction. And my only question is, at what point are we going to realize that what we're doing is wrong? And then, maybe we take a pause and then figure out what direction would be right,
I'll give you an example on that. So for example, I remember in about a decade ago or so, when they were doing the new Kwame Nkrumah interchange, I had written an article around that time. Okay. Why I think it was a wrong idea. It was a bad idea to do the Kwame Nkrumah interchange circle. And I got a lot of backlash here. I was quite young at the time. Nobody knew me. Who is this guy writing about? What you think about when we are trying to build Accra Dubai? You don't want to. You're saying we shouldn't. It's not a good idea. But the reason why I was saying that was we've gone past interchanges in the heart of a city. There are cities that are pulling down interchanges and turning them into green parks. You understand? And the more interchanges we are building and the more roads and widening the roads and all of that, we're actually just catering to a very small population, a population that have the what's the word I'm looking for? The population that are privileged enough to have cars. So you're just building all this infrastructure so that people who have cars, one person sits in a car here, another person sits in a car there, can drive fast across the area. But the real city is below that interchange. The real majority of the people are down there on the ground. What are we doing for those people? So for me, I feel like we need to rethink what we see as development. We need to bring urban development to the people. And that means that rather than expand the highway so that more cars can pass through, how about create an extra lane for a bus rapid transit system, for example?
Right.
First of all, it's cheaper because you're not building, let's say, 6 extra lanes. You're building just 1 lane on both sides, and you are making it exclusive to a city-operated bus rapid system, and it's exclusive. So what that means is that you are transporting more people because the bus will take about 60 to 70 people, right? Meanwhile, a car or 2 or 3 cars that occupy the same space of that bus will take maybe maximum 10 people. So you are building all of this infrastructure for fewer people. Meanwhile, the opposite is that you could actually build less infrastructure that will serve more people. So you are spending less money, but you are still solving a problem. What then happens is that people begin to abandon their cars because all of a sudden I can get across from Kasua to Tema in under 30 minutes. Why would I need to drive? And when I get to any side of town, I can do all of my rounds on a bus or on a decent bus, because there's also the issue of human dignity and all of that. So all of the money that goes into all of these interventions that we think are development should rather go into solving the problem of the masses. Raise the level of the masses by creating standard, equitable infrastructure that everyone has access to. Then everything else will fall in place.
Right. Yeah, I think one of our biggest challenges is trying to copy cities whose problems are totally different from ours. And sometimes it makes me wonder the kind of research that goes into some of these projects, because an example is in 2007 when we expanded the N4. Within the first couple of years, it looked like it made a ton of sense. But then a decade and a half later, you find that there's still a ton of traffic during the rush hour.
Sometimes the solutions to cities and urban design, if you like, are very counterintuitive. And the reason why we find ourselves in this situation is the lack of meritocracy in our system. We don't give the right jobs to the right people. Very often in the discourse about cities is you find people who, I'll give you an example. When there's a flood, our perennial flooding situation, you turn on the radios and the journalists are calling lawyers and economists and politicians and whatnot, asking their opinions about the flooding. Everybody's just saying what they think, pure water rubber, we are choking our gutters and all of that. It's really not that. Those are symptoms. All of those things, choking our gutters and all that, are symptoms. But the gutter in itself is not even appropriate in the first place, let alone it being choked. You get my point. We don't have a proper sort of drainage system. If you don't have a proper drainage system, how are you going to have water, especially considering that Accra is a basin that lies between the sea and then, what they call a mountainous range, if you like. Right. So we are certainly in a basin, and we continue to build and cover the ground. We are building more highways, but we're not building a commensurate number of drainage and a proper hierarchy of the drainage. Because even if you do a proper drainage in a neighborhood, and you don't have a secondary drain to take that onto a tertiary drain and then to eventually get that to the ocean, you've done nothing. You understand? You can have a beautiful neighborhood, all the drainage is done properly, the roads are done properly, and you just still get flooded because your gutters will only hold so much water. But where does the gutters take the water to? And where does that take? How does it eventually end up in the ocean?
Exactly. So with urban planning focusing on the macro level and urban design focusing on the micro level, for instance, storefronts or sidewalks or maybe just spaces between buildings, right? Why do you think there's so much inconsistency in how we approach urban design? And in Accra, for instance, you find that within every few meters, there's like a different material being used on the sidewalk. I don't even know if we should call it a sidewalk. It's just an individual in their own kindness trying to do something.
Yeah, it's because we don't even have urban design to start with. And I think that's something a lot of people haven't noticed.
Or the schools don't teach urban design?
They teach urban design, but as a city or as a country in policy, you don't even hear the word urban design. You hear urban planning or settlement planning.
Right.
You hear architecture, and all of that. But you don't really hear enough about urban design. So I'll give you, again, I always have examples. Our roads, when they are built, they are usually designed by engineers, not architects. And you know the whole issue of the macro versus the micro. Yes, there's nothing in between. We have planners recognized by the city as planners. We have architects recognized by the city as architects. We don't have urban designers recognized by the city. And urban designers deal with the human scale, those spaces
In between.
the architecture and then the city. And so a lot of those spaces just take on the form of their own. And that's why a lot of informal settlements begin to build up in these spaces. Because if I build my fence wall, between my fence wall and the road, it's almost like no man's land. You know, the people who need it will take it up and do what they know how to. You know. And so we need to have that middle ground, whether it's an agency or whatever it is within our city authorities to deal with these spaces. And largely it's architects who are supposed to be doing that kind of work. Because architects do urban design as part of our studies, but we don't get to practice it. Because the city does not employ urban designers. I'm not talking about planners. On the streets, you know. Even look at the recent issue that came up with the underbridge, with a lady trying to build, you know, something in that. I didn't think it was a bad idea, to be honest with you. And I wrote about it and people bashed me a little bit. But I still stand my ground. I've seen underbridges around the world that are incredible. Places where people are skating. You go to places where there are, you know, ice cream, you know, shops or kiosks and stuff like that, beautifully designed. There are the street furniture where people can sit. I've seen, and people were a bit outraged about the car wash, for example. And again, when I say I don't disagree with the idea, the implementation is one thing, but the idea, I've seen a car wash in the parking lot of a mall.
Right.
Right? You understand?
Yeah.
So for me, I think it's because we don't apply innovation and creativity in the way we design our cities. It's not about whether something is possible or not. Nothing is impossible when it comes to design. It's just being intentional that matters. So that it's not because there's just an underbridge, someone decides that this is what I'm going to do, but the city recognizing that underbridges are an opportunity. And so let's engage architects to say all of the underbridges across the city, rather than leaving them for, you know, the mentally deranged, who should be taken care of anyway, and, you know, hawkers and whatnot to just do with them what they want to. What can we do with them so that they become even more important? And it's a great opportunity.
Yeah, the conversation has just been narrowed to having murals.
I'm appalled by the outrage. It's like there's always a lot of public outrage over things that are things that we need to take a step back, and then like, especially to defer to the experts, to hear the opinion of the experts, to now form our own opinion. People just are outraged about everything.
Yeah, sometimes it feels really strange just seeing a minister out yelling at hawkers and trying to evict them. My immediate thought is that, dude, that's not your job, you know.
Listen to that woman. She had a permit. She said she had engaged the city. They had even given her guidelines about how she could do it and how she couldn't do it and all of that. And that is why she went ahead to do it. She was even making a point that she's not a stupid person to just come and do something like that without going through the right processes. So it's only because we don't even trust our city authorities that they know what they are doing that there's that outbreak. Because otherwise, if we understood that for example, each district had a district architect, and that's something that does not exist. You know? And we have district engineers. We don't have district architects. And we all know that engineers build structures. It's unfortunate. We've got the whole thing twisted. You see, our local authorities system, whatever it is they call it again, I think local government system needs to be taken a serious look at, because that's the fundamental. I mean, that's the building block of our societies, of our cities. And if we don't go in there and find the right people to do the right work in those spaces, this is the problem that we'll always have. Because what business has a regional minister with determine how a city should go? That's the work of a mayor.
Exactly.
That's the work of a mayor.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, our mayors are appointed by the executive. So the mayor is not independent. You get it? And so they are always subject to the political temperature.
Right.
So even when you get mayors who really want the right thing to be done, and for the right thing to be done, you're going to have to step on a lot of toes. And usually with our political system, stepping on toes also means that the party is going to suffer. You get it? So I feel like we need to find a way. First of all, every district needs to have its architect. There has to be someone who oversees a certain area in terms of how that area's planning should go. Planning, design, all the way from the micro to the macro. Then we also have to ensure that those plans are communicated very clearly to the inhabitants, the people, because they have to be brought along.
Yep.
If the GPRTU, if you like, is part of the process of planning the city, they are engaged, they will behave. You understand? If they don't understand even why something was done, like a new road is built, and then they come and put on billboards to say, use this, use that, go this way, good. Meanwhile, they weren't even part of the process of determining all of that, or at least they weren't informed in a very clear manner how things should be done on our roads. They are going to do their own thing.
Yeah, that was awesome. Let's move away from urban planning for a second. In a recent video you made, you mentioned that most people assume an architect's job is to just produce drawings. So I'm curious, when you encounter clients with that kind of mindset, how do you deal with that?
That's a vast majority of clients anyway. So, I mean, first of all, it's the reason why I started that series, to try and educate people, because the education hasn't gone down as well as it should have over the years. I mean, architects are very insular. We spend a lot of time behind our screens and all of that. And we're also very sort of, what's the word? Laid back. You don't want to put yourself out there. And so we haven't taken the opportunity to educate people as much as possible. But the truth is, design is not about drawings. The drawing is just the end product. It's what you receive at the end of a long process of thinking, analyzing the site, analyzing your needs, doing your feasibility and viability. Like all of that stuff happens in the background. And then eventually the drawing is just a way of representing all of those ideas that have been put together. And so if you come and you say you want a drawing, I mean, it's like going to a lawyer, like I said in the video, and say, look, this is my case. This is what you're going to say in court. You get it? Totally. You can't do that. You go and present your case. Look, I'm trying to build a house for my family of maybe 5 people. My kids are such and such and such ages. For example, I usually have a house help, and my parents visit us a lot. I'm trying to build on a 1 acre lot. I want my kids to be able to have, you try and paint the aspiration of what it is you're trying to achieve. And then the architect takes that, and then, of course, with the budget as well, which is also very important. The architect now takes all that information with all of the 8 years of training to become a qualified architect that you go through. They synthesize all that and they churn out something for you. Of course, the client is part of the process, not to say that you're just going to come tell me a poem and then I'll come up with something for you, even though that has happened sometimes. But the whole idea is that you are listening to your clients, you are taking what it is they are trying to achieve, trying to picture that life they are trying to build for themselves. And it could also be just that they want to make money out of it. So it's really not about them. It's really about maybe they want to use it for a short-let rental, or they want to build a resort or something like that. Then, even though the client is telling you what it is they want, you as an architect who understands human behavior as well with regards to space, also tells your client, look, this is what you're trying to do. You're trying to make this kind of income with this project. These are the things that you need. You understand? So the clients don't always have it figured out, and they should stop thinking they have it all figured out. That's the thing. Architects are very well trained to see the future. That's literally what we do. We see the future. And so whether it's a business you're trying to run and then you need a space to run that business, whether it's a house you're trying to build for yourself and your family, whether it's your retirement home, whether it's a holiday resort, whatever it is you're trying to do, you can trust that your architect knows enough about it, or as much about it as you think you may.
Right.
And that they have the tools to even research further into it and then gather the most relevant information to produce something that'll be worth your while.
So for someone watching or listening who's in the process of building their home or just a space for their business, how would you advise them to navigate this process with their designer?
I mean, first of all, you need to, I'm assuming that they've already done all their due diligence. They have a piece of land in a good location for what it is they're trying to do and all of that. So I'm not going to go into all of that, but it's important that you find the right architect, right, for first start, because there are architects who do different kinds of things. And unfortunately, in Ghana, we don't do too much specialization, but you can still see a trend, or you can see the kind of experience that the architect has got. So find the right architect who resonates with you, with your style, with what it is you're trying to do. Because again, architects have different, schools of thoughts in terms of how design should go. So find someone that there'll be as little friction as possible in terms of aligning with what you are trying to achieve in terms of style. And also, it's important that you have a clear idea what you want, at least the fundamentals, the non-negotiables. I want to build a house, for example, how many rooms I want and why. And also know your budget. That's a very important one. I can't stress on it enough. Ghanaians have a problem with telling you their budgets. And I don't know why, but my assumption is that they feel if it's already a budget, then you're going to charge them. Basically, to start with, you have to let them know your brief. You have to let them know where you want to build, what this you're trying to build. The architect ideally should go see the sites and understand direction of wind, the soil, the views. There's so many things that are considered. So sometimes people think you can just take one plan and then just go and, of course you can do that, but it will be a shape. It's like just taking the measurements of, like a tailor taking the measurements of one person and using it to make clothes for another. That's exactly what you do when you take a plan from, one that was designed for a particular site and then just taking it to another site.
Yeah, especially when the site comes with a different set of constraints.
So it's important that your architect, if your architect is not going to site and starts drawing, you chose the wrong architect.
What's your take on people hiring designers from platforms such as Fiverr and individuals who are not formally trained as architects?
And this might be a bit controversial, this is architects. For me personally, I really don't have a problem how people decide to procure their building projects, right? And I think we need to, as architects, get a bit off our high horses, if you like, for a moment, because we are not all that, and not everybody should work with an architect. I don't believe that everybody who wants to build has to go to an architect. An architect is the best solution. So I'll give you an example. Not everybody who wants clothes has to go to a tailor. Some people just will prefer to walk into, I don't want to give any, I won't mention, but some people will just want to walk into a shop, try something on, and if it fits, they walk out with it. And that's the convenience they want with what it is they're trying to do. And not every project is deep like that, in my opinion. Not every project. We sometimes, as architects, we get a bit too, we over-romanticize the idea of what it is we do. Our craft caters to a specific kind of people, especially when we want to do it on the bespoke level, right? Go around the world, housing especially, is not everybody gets to hire an architect to design a house for them exactly how they want it. The majority of people just get to buy cookie cutter houses that are already built en masse, because that's the economic level of those group of people. They are the group of people who want to do things bespoke. Yeah, people who walk into some of the top known brands to make them a suit for a particular event. So there's that, and then there's a person who also just wants to walk into a shop and put something on. So I don't have a problem personally with people procuring their designs for their buildings, however it is deep fit. The most important thing is that the process of getting that building sort of certified and deemed worthy enough to be built in the city is what we need to concentrate on. Even in the UK, unless I'm mistaken, and in the comments, I'm sure if I'm mistaken, someone will correct me. But I know for sure that even people can design their homes on a piece of paper and have it built, as long as it can go through the permitting process. And the permitting process is so strict that by the time you go through that process with an unqualified design, you wish you had hired an architect from the start. You get the point. So
Right.
At the end of the day, it is that permitting process that really should be fixed. Because if I can sit down and design something. There are people who are very creative. Look, I've gone to an artist's house, which he built himself. So this was an artist who has built this wonderful, gallery space, and then he has a house and like all these workshops and all that in the woods and somewhere in the eastern region of the mountain range. And it's just incredible what he's done with the space. And this is someone who does not have an architecture degree. And again, I'll remind your viewers that there are architects, Pritzker Prize winning architects who never went to architecture school.
Ando.
Exactly. You get it. So for me, the real issue is that our permitting process is where we can draw the line. Who does the design? The client is at liberty to choose that. We advise you use an architect because it saves you a lot. It's the best way to go. The architect is the person who's most trained, especially along the entire building process, not just the design. Again, that's where people get it wrong, which is that the architect does the design, but then they also see to the construction. You understand? So if there's one person who can guide you through that whole process, it's your architect. There's no other individual who knows as much about the entire building process than the architects. At least they know a little bit about everything. Whereas other professionals in the built environment are more, they are more specialized. So, yeah.
All right, that was awesome. So you recently completed a house on the mountain. Tell us about it.
Okay, this is a 3-bedroom house we did in Ebri, well, Obosmase, which is very close to Ebri. It's on a very steep hill. It's about a 1 in 3 slope. And the client is an African American couple who are planning on making Ghana their second home, or their primary home actually, and because they are planning on moving to Ghana. In fact, over the years they've been coming and going, and so they fell in love with the country and decided to settle here. And so they wanted to build something that will be a home not just to themselves but also their friends when they visit. Now, for me, again, this was in an area where there's not a lot of development, so it's still very virgin, but it's close to the Obosmase township itself. And for me, an area of reference is always the locality, what pertains to the locality. So the clients specifically wanted, in her brief, one of the first things she mentioned was a courtyard and a lot of green. But it also happens that, of course, when you look at most of our traditional communities, courtyard typology is the most predominant. So it fell right in. It felt like this was perfect for the site. So if you look at sort of an aerial view of the nearby town, the predominant typology of the housing is courtyard. And she wanted a courtyard as well. But it's also a very mountainous area. This is Obosmase, the highest peak on the, or what you call the Ekrapim range. So you can imagine how high that is. So you won't find any flat ground. You barely find any flat ground. What that also means is that there was a beautiful view across the valley to the Dodowa area. So at night, you can see the lights sparkling, very beautiful. During the day, because they are so far out, you see mostly green. And so it would be a shame if you were putting a building in a place like that and disregard the view. But if you're going to do a courtyard in the traditional sense of a courtyard, then it also meant that one part of the building will always block the view, and then certain spaces within the building will not have the view. And it was important to me that with this beautiful view, you can't deny anybody that view. So I established right from the beginning that every room had to have a view, a glimpse of that view, at least even if there wasn't a priority space, but it should still have a slight glimpse of the view, at least from an angle. So, and because it was a slope, basically what we came up with was like a split courtyard. So you had the the more public area as you arrive on the building, because it's very high on the sides, because you arrive at the site from the highest point. When you arrive at the site, what you see is a 1-story building, just one floor. You would have no idea that there was another floor below because of the slope.
Right.
And so you had a split courtyard where from the top you can see across the courtyard at the bottom, and you can have the view. And within the building, it was like, I called it a cascading courtyard because there was a series of courtyards. So as you enter the living area, there's a mezzanine, which serves like an internal courtyard within the public zone, where there's a spiral stair that takes you down to another courtyard, which connects you to the private zone. And then right across all of these spaces, you still have the view. And then when you get down to that's the sub basements, so I call it. There's a wing on the right, which is more of the private bedroom for the couple themselves, and then 2 guest rooms on the left hand side. And then at that level as well, then there's an actual green courtyard where a shrub and some plants, and then that looks onto an infinity pool that cascades towards the view. And so that was the whole idea. Now another opportunity that came up because of the split floor was that the roof of the floor below now served as a terrace, the green terrace for the floor above. Right. So it's literally just every space you're in some kind of a courtyard with a view, and then it all cascades that way. So that was basically the principle.
So one thing I really love about that project is the fact that it sits seamlessly with the contours of the site. So how important was that aspect of the design to you?
I mean, so it's, in school we're taught contour lines, topo map, all of that stuff. But for some reason, a lot of architects discount all of that once they get into the field. One thing that I've always, as soon as a client tells me their site is in a breed or it's somewhere along the Equipment range, I know there's going to be a slope because it's a mountainous area. There's always, and sometimes people discount even a 1 degree slope. But by the time you go 10 meters, you're 1 meter down, and that makes a huge difference. So sometimes someone will tell you, oh, the site is flat. You don't have to go. I mean, the site is flat. I mean, this is the site plan. This is the, orientation. Just start. I'm like, no, I have to go to the site because there's nothing. There's barely anything as a what do you call it? As a flat land. There's always some kind of a slope in one way or the other. So as soon as I know it's a bit, I go to the site, and then I let the client know that you're going to have to pay for a survey. And nowadays, it's not as expensive as it used to be because now you can even do it with drones, right? It's just an hour or two, you're done, points are picked. I mean, not always, but, so sometimes it's better to go in with the right instruments and pick the contours. But at the very least, go there with the drone, get a surveyor who can do a topo survey, let them give you the contours. And a lot of the tools I use a lot of digital tools, so I would reconstruct that contour. So I always tell my clients that what I'm trying to do is, because sometimes when you tell them to do a topo survey, they don't understand what you're trying to do. Well, and what's all that for? What I'm telling you is I'm creating a digital twin of your site, taking it to my office so I can be on the site while I'm in the office and designing for the site. And what this is going to help you with is that it's going to save you a lot of costs with retaining, with cutting and filling all of the civil works that need to be done in order to create a flat ground on a space like that. And it always ends up creating a design that is very thoughtful. So it's actually going to save you money. So do this upfront, do the contour, the site's topo survey, and I'll reproduce the site and I'll build with the site. So that's usually the way to go. Because without an idea of what the slope is like, sometimes you may see it and you try to estimate it, but you realize that you're getting certain things wrong. So it saves a lot of money at the end of the day, especially in those parts of, because sometimes in areas where you don't need to cut, you find people cutting and trying to fill up somewhere when you could have just followed the slope, and at the end of the day, come up with something that would even be more beautiful than you thought.
I noticed you use a lot of wood in your projects, right? So what factors influence your choice of materials when designing a space?
So the projects where you see me use a lot of wood, it's part of, so I have a company called Shelter Space. I co-founded. And the whole idea was, as an architect over the years, I got a bit disillusioned with working with clients. It's a difficult client. You have to educate them all the time and try to explain what this we do. But I mean, it's the nature of our work, so you have to do it. And they are very important to us. But I'm also an entrepreneur, and I'm not one of those who feel that you have to suffer for the sake of design. You have to, I feel like architects should be able to make a good living. And so I was doing a lot of brainstorming. There was a point shortly before COVID where I was doing a lot of introspection about, my career moving forward and all of that, because really architecture wasn't paying enough. A lot of clients don't want to pay the right fees, and especially when you haven't built up, a huge portfolio yet. You haven't, people don't see you on a certain level. It's really hard to break that, income ceiling. And also, unfortunately, a lot of architects don't pay very well enough. So I was trying to figure out ways to be able to make money beyond the service of architecture. and then to sort of create a product. Because one thing that became very clear to me as a student of business, if you like, is that there's nothing that beats selling a product. And there's some service, you're selling your time for money. Product, you're selling your intellectual property, which can be sold multiple times for money. But I didn't also want to go the route of producing pre-built, pre-designed floor plans and sort of building sets and just selling them off, because that's also fundamentally against how I approach architecture. So my question was, when a real estate company, I know you asked about wood.
Yeah, just keep going. I'm totally enjoying this.
And when a real estate company builds, let's say 100 homes and they are selling them, they are literally just selling a building. Yeah, it's a pre-built design. It's pre-built, you go in and you buy. But I didn't have the money to be able to do that kind of building several structures and selling them. So what did I do? I came up with a design that I felt was very minimalistic. It was very, it goes through prefabrication. It's prefabricated, it's modular, and they came up with a system of construction and founded a company based on that. So basically, Shelter Space is a prefab company that builds these like tiny homes, 15 square meter, 30 square meter, 60 square meter, 75 square meter, in those sort of increments. So it's made up of, it's almost like a kit of parts. And again, another counterintuitive, and the reason I say that is wood is infinitely renewable, right? Yeah, wood is renewable. You can always plant trees. So it's only because we are not doing it sustainably as a country or in a lot of countries, but there are countries where they do a lot of sustainable forestry, where they build, they sort of create forests just so they can log. You understand? So it's renewable. We just have to have a system of renewing it so that we can continue to build with it. So for me, wood is very important. It's a sustainable material. The embodied, carbon is very little, so basically I came up with a system of construction where you can put together wood very quickly, very inexpensively, and then also very easily deployable to different kinds of sites. So that's how come my interest in wood got piqued. And then over the years, I did some research, and we piloted it at the beach at Kokobite, and it was a hit. People loved it. People wanted to live in it and all of that. And then that spurred onto, a hospitality company where we built a micro resort out of it, and it has taken a life of its own. We are building another one at Abuse in the eastern region by the lake. Beautiful designs. So yeah, that's how I got into wood. Then obviously doing that, learning so much about wood, I got into woodworking proper, because that's always my passion. I always love to make things with my hands. So I go into woodwork and then eventually some joinery and all of that. And I currently work with a joinery company.
So what has your process of proposing a new material revealed to you about the Ghanaian client? Because I have, in conversation with some of my friends and people that I know who are architects as well, they would say that, it's very difficult to propose a completely new material. I mean, sometimes it's not even new, because timber, for instance, and even rammed earth, for instance, these are not new materials, but clients would typically be against trying something that they're not familiar with. I totally understand that that's their brain just doing its own natural thing. So they'll tend to go with what's available on the market.
I'll tackle what you were saying about a lot of architects thinking it's hard to convince clients to use different materials. And rightly so. I mean, clients, want the best out of their money. And so that is where I feel like the architecture profession in Ghana is lacking, which is that we haven't put our money where our mouths are. A lot of architects have had the opportunity to build for themselves. And then some of them don't even use the material that they're proposing to their clients. So I just expect your client to use it. We lack so many materials. Architects are not being daring enough, because in their built environments, especially material production space, it's architects who lead the way. It's architects that challenge industries to come up with products, to come up with materials. So we should be leading the way in saying, look, I want to do this out of this material and it doesn't exist, but I'm challenging you to make it happen.
Yeah, one thing I really love about architecture is the fact that when we design, we have to think about how a particular thing can be built, right? But then in reality, once we're done, we pass it over to a structural engineer, and then he has to take on that responsibility of making it come to life.
And unfortunately, a lot of architects have not recognized that power. They haven't recognized that power. And that's what really, peeves me a lot, which is that we need to understand what our role in society is. Not just catering to clients and designing building. It's also to lead. We are tastemakers.
Yeah.
You know, we sort of drive the agenda of an entire industry if we do our work right. You get my point. So yes, I've started building out of wood. They are not perfect by any means. I mean, if you visit any of our projects, you'll find, and progressively we are getting better and better at it. And recently we've had to even engage some producers from India who came to Ghana exploring sort of industrial opportunities here. And, you know, they met us, and we are beginning to develop products that would make what we are doing even better. So that's the process. We have to put our money where it is. And a lot of the great architects of our time, we know they've done experimental projects. A lot of them are, at least even if it was just a cabin in their backyard, or it was like some holiday home in somewhere, rather than buying all the big cars with the money we make and, you know, all that stuff, we need to put our money where our mouths are. Yeah, and in that regard, one of the architects I really admire, and he's always been a mentor, like I mentioned to you the other time, Joe Adu. He's very experimental about how he approaches architecture. And he didn't only preach it, but when he had the opportunity to build his own house, he built it, you know, with these materials. There's bamboo, there's wood. The building is, you know, when you visit the place, there's no AC and everything. It's a whole thesis in his way of thinking. It is not perfect by any means, but that's the thing. You don't have to achieve perfect. You have to take a first step and keep moving. So in every project you do, you try and push your agenda as well within that process. And collectively, if all architects were doing that, would be able to really set the trends rather than allowing Pinterest and Instagram to set the trends.
So for an architect who has been able to transition into product design, what has the journey been like? And also, are the furniture pieces that you design available for people to buy, or they're exclusively for the spaces that you design?
I think of myself as a furniture designer now, because I have actually designed a furniture collection, which I'm trying to produce. I've done a few prototypes here and there. So that was an initiative that I took on my own. At a point, you know, as an architect, again, I've always been very experimental about how I do things. So I've always had, it's always one step for me. It's like a building takes, 24 months to be constructed. And then there's always that lag where, for someone who's very creative and likes to see things happen, I'm always looking for something to do that I can see results as quickly as possible.
I like that.
Although I love architecture, I love to design buildings and see them constructed, but that architecture is a very long game, especially in our parts. So then that brought me to the shelter space, where I started designing buildings that can be put up in 6 to 8 weeks. You know, you design it within 6 to 8 weeks. The thing is built, it's on site, it's functional. But then that now started becoming too short. They're too long. So I keep chasing that because I always like to see that end product. I mean, even in architecture school, the reason why I got so good at 3D modeling and rendering is because I wanted to see my designs very, very quickly.
Yeah.
You understand? So it was like, it's almost like you get to play God. So then now I've come to the more micro level, where I started designing furniture, and then I set up a furniture workshop where I built this furniture myself. I have a whole Instagram wood workshop.
Yeah, and what's it called?
Wood workshop. WUD.WOK.shop.
Hey, thanks so much, Hassan. We've come to the last part of Tuition Jrnl that I call the rapid fire set of questions. You don't have to think so much about it. Just whatever pops up in your brain, you just tell me. All right, so let's do it. So the very first one, concrete, rammed earth, or timber?
Wow. I'd say timber, because that's what I've been in recent.
Next one, one building you think every architect should visit in Ghana and also outside Ghana?
In Ghana, I would say Senior Staff Clubhouse, KNUST. Can I add one?
Yeah.
Or the Scots House in Accra.
Awesome. And outside Ghana?
Outside Ghana,
Is there any that?
I would say the Nemo Museum in Amsterdam.
Okay. And the next one, budget constraint or time constraint?
Budget constraints.
Budget constraint. And then hand sketch or a 3D render?
I'll say hand sketch, because now you can get a 3D render out of the hand sketch.
And the very last one, what's one misconception you think most clients have about architecture?
Architects are expensive. If you think architects are expensive, try building without an architect.
Thank you so much for such an insightful and thoughtful conversation. What this conversation does is it gives people clarity into exactly what architects do, which goes far beyond just creating drawings, you know. And also, I appreciate the fact that you shared with us your experience and your expertise, you know. It's been a really valuable conversation, and I'm super grateful for the depth you brought to it. Thank you.